Okay, Mark meets Matt Heinl, the Chief Creative Officer at Moving Brands. Hi Matt.
Hello Mark, nice to see you.
Thanks for inviting me in.
Pleasure.
Can you give us a summary of your career?
Yeah, very easy. I studied history at university for about 6 months, realised I was going to fail at that miserably, did fail at it.
What university?
Bristol. Realised I should never have done that, which was quite a painful decision, and actually stuck to my guns, which was art and design. I loved art and design since a very small child and did it all the way through school, A-level and so on. And dropped out of that course and basically went about trying to get myself on a foundation course in London, where I grew up, and went to Chelsea. Then I went to St Martin's. I did an exchange to the Cooper Union in New York, which was amazing for a semester, which was very interesting because it's the exact opposite setup of St Martin's, where St Martin's is very open-ended and conceptually focused. Cooper Union was very much about design rigor and the design industry. So I got a kind of snippet of what that world was like, and then came back, did some freelancing, and then pretty much about, must have got no more than 7-8 months after leaving college, came for an interview at Moving Brands and got a job as a work experience, and sort of somehow clung on, and I've been here for 9 years now.
Who hired you?
Actually, the two of the founders, Ben Wolstenholme and James Bull, interviewed me, and it was we were much smaller then. I think we were about 10 or 11 people when I joined. We had one floor of the studio you've just been to over the road, and completely different looking place, but still the same energy, same vibe. Everything feels pretty similar to how it was all those years ago, and then I've been working with those guys closely for that time.
So you've climbed the ladder here at Moving Brands.
Yeah.
Has that been through people leaving, through luck, or through loyalty, or because you're brilliant at what you do, or a mixture, or all of it?
I imagine it's heavily due to luck, people leaving, circumstantial stuff that goes on, hopefully a little bit of talent in there as well, but also a very flat organisation. We're not extremely hierarchical. I mean, I think I can remember when we started to have some job titles. So that happened kind of after I'd been there for a while, or been here for a while. And so we've not been super established in that way of working. We're very, very flat sort of system, if you like, the business.
How many people are Moving Brands today?
Well, we've got 3 studios. In London, there's around 50 odd. In San Francisco, it's around 20, and in Zurich, it's 2.
And what does Chief Creative Officer mean?
Chief Creative Officer is it's a way of giving a title to someone who's responsible for the creative output of a business. And that can be an agency, it can be a consultancy, it can be a client business. It tends to be a title that's maybe a little bit more used in the advertising and actually gaming industries is where I've seen it more. It's not very common in the branding and design space, which we play a bit more heavily in. But really what it means is that I'm responsible for the stuff that we make.
And how hands-on are you when it comes to the visual execution or output of stuff?
In terms of me physically making things.
Well, where do you get involved in a project typically?
Typically I'll get involved all the way through, but in a quite specific way where I won't be actually making the design itself, but I'll be involved in conversations, client facing, as you can imagine, early on in an engagement, but also throughout the life of a project. I might be working with the leads of that project, but maybe behind the scenes, and we'll be having discussions, and I might be giving them a little bit of perspective about how we could maybe approach this and so on. So some of it's in terms of output, you might not actually see a great deal of things on the table, but it's a lot of discussion and shaping. In a sense, it's kind of designing. It's design, but it's designing the way in which we're going to do something as opposed to the actual thing we're going to make. There's a team of some of the most talented people in London making things who are fantastic designers, and I don't really need to give them a hand on that.
So you've only really spent your career at one agency, which is
Absolutely.
really unusual. Most people to get to where you've got to, certainly over kind of a 9-year period of experience different environments.
Yeah.
What is it about moving brands that have kept you here?
Well, I think that point about it moving environments is really interesting, because in 9 years I really can't remember a year that's been like the previous, and I'm sure you hear that quite a lot, but it's really quite astonishing when I look back how different things are. Going from 10 people on one floor to, I think in 2 years we went up to something like 70 odd people. We moved over the road, then we opened another business in Tokyo, and then we moved over to SF, and then Zurich and so forth, and the client base changing quite dramatically, the type of offering adapting, the amount of people who are more in a consulting role, doing more strategy, all that kind of stuff has been really very, very significant. So it's kind of extremely compressed. It's like being in it feels like I've been in a few different companies, but it happens to be in the same building. And so I don't, I think it's worth moving on when you think there's nothing else you can do in that context. And I still feel like there's a lot to do.
If you say to me that you've never been a headhunter before, I won't believe you. So how have you managed to kind of get through that period of just thinking if the grass is green on the other side?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it really comes down to, this is a completely personal perspective, but trying to interrogate what is being asked of you. So you talk about carrots, and that's quite interesting, because a carrot may look like a job title, may look like money, may look like a famous company who's speaking to you, but what is the actual thing they're asking of you, and what is the actual thing they're asking of themselves? Quite hard to work out when you're not there.
And often they don't know themselves.
They may not know themselves, and that's actually part of what's exciting potentially as well. But I can honestly say the very scarce instances that's happened to me, and there's been some relatively interesting ones, but I've sort of questioned what they're trying to achieve, and it hasn't been quite clear. What's the goal? And I think there's a difference between going through a series of jobs for an economic reason, let's say, or a title reason or career progression reason, versus trying to achieve a goal that is not related to that. And there haven't been those types of conversations, in my view, that seem that interesting. I mean, in my industry, in our area, I think, I'm trying to be objective, or obviously impossible, but I think that what we're doing is more interesting than any of our competitors at the moment, and has been for some time. So it would be quite an interesting conversation for someone to say, this will be more interesting work, and that's what I'm mostly interested in. When it comes down to it, is the work really going to be exciting?
In your career so far, has there been a moment when you've been pitching in front of clients or work parties or something where you've really embarrassed yourself?
There's been many of those occasions, as you probably can imagine, but there's been one that sticks in the mind and the throat, which was I was doing quite a lot of work with Mindshare, who are WPP media agency, and we'd created a brand for them, and I'd gone on a kind of trip around, not the entire globe, but New York, Singapore, Spain, blah blah blah, doing kind of brand engagement work. So trying to land the new brand we've created and help people understand why and what tools they had and so on. So it was a lot of presenting and discussing things with people, and I caught some sort of flu on the plane on the last leg, and the last presentation was in London, and it was the smallest, thank God. It was only about 50 people, and I remember thinking, I don't feel great. I'm not, but I'll do it. I'll just push through. It's fine. Got to be professional. And I got up on the at the front of the room, people there, and they were kind of like, not everyone's always excited about those type of conversations, because it's kind of, if they're done in the wrong way, they're probably used to people going up there and going, here are more rules you have to follow. I wasn't trying to do that, but I can understand they had hesitation. And I got up, started talking, and I had a coughing fit, like a really bad coughing fit, a cry cough. And then I had to not run, but sort of walk briskly out of the room, because that's the only place where there were liquids. And I started drinking, and then I carried on coughing, and I started choking on the water, and it was kind of getting everywhere all over my shirt. And I finally got back in, and my voice sort of calmed down a bit, and I carried on, apologised. My client was sitting in the front row there, absolutely horrified, really embarrassed. And I carried on talking, and then about 30 seconds later, it just went. My voice absolutely disappeared. I don't know if you've ever had this situation.
So you were talking, but nothing was coming out?
Literally just talking, and it's gone, completely gone. And people in the room were just looking at me like I was something seriously wrong with me, like I was joking. I just couldn't make any noise. It was just air coming out. And I remember her, I think she looked at me and looked up and mouthed, "What the fuck?" And I said, and then I just had to sit down, and she had to stand up and do it for me. But luckily we'd been doing it a few times before. Yeah. She did a brilliant job, actually. Hospital passed, but that was pretty embarrassing, because I was at the front and I could just feel everyone looking at me going, "What a loser, he can't even present his work."
Yeah, because as far as they're concerned, that's the first one. They don't know you've been around the world to...
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and they're not interested, they just want to get on. But I mean, those sorts of things are really embarrassing, but they're also good, because whenever I have to go and give a presentation, I kind of just think, it can't be worse than that time I went to Mindshare,
Who inspires you creatively?
God, lots of people, but usually, I think it's usually people slightly outside of our industry. I'm not a big researcher into the design world. I'm probably a little bit ignorant, but that's partly on purpose. And I think really just going out into the world and looking at stuff. I know that sounds really weak, but it's true. I think there's lots of interesting things to hear and see all around us, particularly if you're living in a city. I mean, you're just constantly bombarded with interesting stuff. So I'd say it's less a person or a movement, and slightly more related to a context. Which
agencies, not necessarily in the UK, maybe internationally, do you look up to? I know you said you don't do a lot of research into the design space, which is cool. But are there agencies that you think, wow, they're really kind of ahead of the game?
I think all the agencies that I think are really interesting wouldn't call themselves agencies.
Okay, consultancies?
I don't know what they call themselves really. I mean, I'm a big fan of Kin, which is run by Kevin and Matt Wade. Matt Wade used to work with me for many years. We started in the same week here at Moving Brands. He's a great guy. I think what Berg do is incredible stuff, and the guys who run that are really interesting people. I've got a lot of respect for some of the larger agencies. Like what Imagination has done consistently over many years is super impressive as a business. Those are the kind of they come at it in a kind of, maybe Imagination slightly less because they're quite specific about the things they do, but there's a kind of agnostic approach to applying design, applying creativity to interesting opportunities, and that really excites me, rather than lots of businesses that I respect who do very good work in an area that it's about the output more than the process or the new opportunity. And I get to work, one of the great things about my role actually is I get to work with loads of other agencies, because when I'm with a client, they'll have a roster and we'll tend to be working together with all those companies. And so I really do get a good insight into how they work and where they're similar and where they're different.
What brand have you enjoyed working on the most, and why? Is there one you're particularly proud of or excited about?
Yeah, it's hard not to sound glib. I mean, they're all. I look at the work very much in terms of. I try to. Sometimes you're working on something that's quite broadly complicated, and there's one aspect of it that's really interesting, but that might not be a headline thing. You know, it might be something technical you learn by working with those guys. That as a whole, the output is more straightforward, but there's something there you learn that's new. I mean, with that said, I've loved all the work we've done with Norton and Sons and eTorch, just because it's kind of so anti what's going on in the world at the moment in terms of the way what they actually make. Those bespoke suits is incredible. It's generational craft being handed down person to person. But Patrick, who runs that business, is an incredibly modern businessman, but he hasn't dicked around with the thing that they make. And I really respect what he's done from a business point of view, as well as his creative direction of those businesses. So that's been a really interesting one.
What's the best bit of career advice you've ever been given?
I had a great bit of career advice early on from a guy which is very, very blunt, but actually I'm glad he said it to me, which was, do what I ask you first and then do what you want to do. Do both and you'll do well. And I was like, that's really interesting, because I was like, no, it should be what, I was a youngster and something. Yeah. But really good bit of advice. At the end of the day, someone's asking you to do something, they have more information, nail that. If you've got a better idea, bring that to the table. Always do both if you can. And the good people usually do. They usually say, I looked at that, and then I also think we could extend it here. Very simple, straightforward.
Let's move on to a quick fire round.
Okay.
Can line or DNA D-pencil?
This is supposed to be quick, right?
Yeah.
Can line?
Olympic gold medal or an Oscar?
Olympic gold medal, I think.
Tea or coffee?
Coffee.
Football or rugby?
Rugby.
Facebook or Twitter?
Twitter.
Ant or deck?
Neither.
Simpsons or Family Guy?
Simpsons, I think.
The brightest person you've worked with?
Wow. Great question. Some seriously smart people. I'm gonna piss people off if I say brightest person. Ooh. I think this is going to sound like sucking up, but I think Ben, who's founder of Moving Brands, is an extremely unusual person, that he can apply his creativity into so many different aspects of design, business, storytelling. It's quite slightly frightening.
The most creative person you've worked with?
Probably. Oh, I see. Okay, so you're talking. Well, I'd probably put Ben in the creative box, because he really sort of pushes that question around. Brightest.
It could be bright and creative.
You can be both, yeah, absolutely. You usually are. I think in my experience they come together. Can I give him two things? He's going to get a really big head if I do that.
Maybe he falls into both categories.
Let's have him in both. Go on.
He might even fall into the last one. Best looking person you've worked with.
Oh, pass.
Creatives or suits?
What's a suit?
That's your answer. Money or happiness?
Happiness.
Apple or Android?
Apple.
Degree or no degree?
Talent.
Retained work or pitch work?
Good work.
Web or mobile?
What's the question?
Web or mobile?
I don't get the difference.
That's your answer. Independent agencies or networked agencies?
Diplomatic answer or direct answer? It's absolutely horses for courses, as far as I can tell. Independent is it's very much about, can be very much about responsibility. I think in a networked agency the question is slightly different, because you're not as near to the consequence that's my read of my observation. I've never worked for a networked agency, but that's my read from the outside.
Outsourced production or on-site production?
On site.
Don Draper or Roger Sterling?
Sterling.
And lastly, twist or stick?
Shimmy.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure, thank you.